what, 2 minutes? And yet the story that will be put into the newspapers can be given 10 pages. Not 10 pages, the newspaper, but 10. If you were to print it out in a book, it'd be like maybe 10 pages long if it's a long story. Depends on the kind of newspaper, I guess. And then what ends up in a full book on a movement, for example, much more full amount of documentation, interviewing, et cetera, et cetera. So when we look at each one of the gospel accounts, for example, clearly at this point, Luke has the least interest in a full accounting of everything that takes place. He's telescoping. His focus is not upon this particular aspect of the story. Matthew and Mark are given a lot of information, and John pops in for some reason here and gives us a lot of information. Now, there's something else to keep in mind. These Gospels were not written on the same day in the same place. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not sitting in a room going, well, how's it going, Mark? Well, I'm about done. And Matthew goes, yeah, man, we're writing a whole lot more than you. And that's not how it took place. They were written at different times. And there seems to be a consensus opinion, which doesn't make it right, but it seems to be a consensus opinion, that John is the last of the Gospels to be written. And there's some reason for that. One of the things we've speculated upon in the past is the fact that if you were writing one of the Gospels and the people you're writing about are still alive, is that going to impact whether you utilize specific names or whether you tell certain stories? Maybe you don't know if someone's yet still alive, and you're concerned that you might expose them to persecution. The persecution begins fairly early in the Christian experience. Certainly, Jewish persecution is there from the start. Roman persecution starts off in the fifth decade, in the 40s. So you may seriously wonder, should I mention someone's name? Should I tell someone's story? Because I don't know where this book's going to go, and you can't pick up the phone and give somebody a ring. You can't drop somebody an email and say, "You mind if I tell your story in the book that I'm writing?" That really isn't even a possibility. And so, for example, John tells us the name of the high priest. Now, it just may be that John follows Jesus into the trial itself. He's right there for most of this stuff, and maybe when the guy is healed, he heard some conversations, and he was just the only person that happened to hear the name of Malchus. Maybe he talked to Malchus. I don't know. Nobody knows. Or it could be that Matthew, Mark, and Luke knew the name as well, but chose not to reveal it because, I don't know about you, but if I was Malchus and I just barely missed that, it's pretty obvious what happened. Ducking under that wild swing from Peter, and takes the ear off, and if the guy that they take away to crucify healed my ear, maybe I became a Christian later on. Maybe I went, wow, I know it was off, I saw it, now it's there. Maybe he pursued John, and maybe John introduced him to who Jesus was. And maybe by the time John writes his gospel, Malchus has died. Or maybe Malchus asks him, tell my story. I don't know. But there are reasons why. If we just allow the writers to be writers and to be in history and to have their own purposes, there are reasons why we have some of the differences that we do. Now, one of the main questions would be to look at John chapter 18 and go, all right, And here again, I apologize to all of you. I realize that most of you are never going to have to talk to as many Muslims as I do and things like that. But, I always remember, I hope some of you remember, remember when Brother Callahan, David Callahan, went off to college and he came back. I'll never forget, one day during class, I was talking about some of this stuff and saying, well, there are people who say this, and this is how we respond. And he put his hand up and said, you often talk about that kind of stuff and apologize about, taking the time to let us know what other people think, and this is why we don't accept that, and this is how we respond, and sometimes you apologize. And, until I went to college and until I got exposed to that stuff, I didn't realize how important it is to know, but don't apologize for it. And I've never forgotten that. And so I mention these things to you along those lines in the hopes. My fear, I guess, always is that someone who would sit in this class for all these years, as we have, at the end would go, well, so yeah, we went through a lot of scripture passages, but sure didn't really prepare me to explain it to anybody else. Or, boy, I tell you, I went out and tried to explain it to somebody, and man, they just had all these objections I never even thought of. Hopefully that won't be what anyone ever says. I don't cover everything, but I try, because I want you to feel ready and prepared to speak about these things, even outside of our nice, comfy circles. So, obviously, one of the objections that is raised is, look, if what John narrated took place, why did Matthew, Mark, and Luke not mention it? And so the argument is real easy. Well, let me explain. People will take this perspective, and you'll see. John chapter 18, in this is extremely important in regards to the deity of Christ. And hopefully you know why. There is a phrase that John emphasizes in his gospel. And we've talked about it before, but again, let me emphasize it so everyone's clear on this. Jesus uses a phrase, ego eimi, I am. He uses it in John 8:24, where he says, unless you believe that ego eimi,